I rise to speak on a matter that is of real concern to many of us in this body, but more importantly to the citizens of this country. And it has to do with our efforts to climb out of this long recession. And there are still pockets of the United States, presiding officer's home state, my home state, that feel like we haven't made any progress. And when I talk to small business owners in my state, I know they're still weathering the storm. They're looking to invest in a down economy, and they really want to start hiring again. And that's why I'm really glad that we're once again debating a small business bill, and that I have a chance to reintroduce the Bipartisan Small Business Lending Enhancement Act as an amendment. Now, I have to say I feel a little bit like this is Groundhog Day. I'm looking at my friend from the great state of Louisiana. We all over again. Back in October of last year, a report by the New York Federal Reserve said that 3/4 of the small businesses looking for credit last summer were turned down or only received some of the financing that they requested. And in this report from the Federal Reserve, they stated, and I want to quote here, reports from small business owners of a credit gap have been both vocal and frequent. So we here in Congress have decided to act on and try to extend additional credit to small businesses, because more credit means additional growth and therefore increased job creation. Now, unfortunately, or I should say, fortunately, we created a $30 billion lending fund for banks, but the unfortunate part of that is we didn't simultaneously allow credit unions to do more. And since that time, banks have been reducing credit availability, and even after receiving $30 billion of taxpayer money in last year's Small Business Jobs Act, banks are still not meeting the demand for small business loans. And so in light of this, I'm still very committed to finally taking the common sense step of allowing credit unions to increase the amount of money they can lend to small businesses. And I've, once again, as I just mentioned, introduced the Bipartisan Small Business Lending Enhancement Act, which would open up additional credit to small businesses without costing taxpayers a dime. Let me say this again, without spending a dime of taxpayer money. You have to acknowledge that credit unions know the small businesses in their communities that need loans to expand and hire, and the credit unions have money to lend to those businesses. Now, right now, Mr. President, federal law limits the amount of small business loans a credit union can extend to 12% of their assets. Nearly 350 credit unions, accounting for approximately 60% of all business loans subject to the 12% cap, are facing their cap and will have to dramatically slow their business lending. Hard for me to believe this fact, that government's telling these financial institutions that they cannot help create jobs in their local communities. And that's why my amendment would double the amount of money credit unions can offer small businesses. We all know these small business owners. I want to touch on two stories. I was particularly compelled by a small businesswoman in Colorado by the name of Stacy Hammond. She's a small business owner in Thornton, Colorado. She started her own business, First Street Salon. And she initially went to a bank for a loan, and she got turned down because credit was in short supply. And to make her dream of owning her small business come true, she went to her credit union, and they gave her the loan that she needed through a second mortgage on her home. And then the success story that Stacy's unfolds in some pretty dramatic and wonderful ways. When I visited her, she had plenty of business, and she'd even hired more workers. And these are real American jobs and a shining example of economic expansion that wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for a credit union stepping up and offering her a loan. Another Coloradan, Lisa Herman of Broomfield, she emailed me a success story about her securing of a credit union loan to expand her business. She's the co-owner of Happy Cakes Bake Shop, getting hungry, it's lunchtime here, in Denver's Highland Square neighborhood. And she's been in business since 2007. And despite some real trouble in the economy, her business has blossomed. Her revenue's up 25% by the summer of 2009. She's booking 20 weddings a month, and she's had to expand her retail operations and move into a new shop. Same story. When she wanted to secure a loan through a traditional bank, it didn't happen. It didn't pan out. But her local credit union was able to provide her with a loan she needed to grow her business. That meant more jobs, and more business for her community. And that's the American way. Now, I know that banks and credit unions are competitors. They don't always get along. But this is not about them. It's about small business. And for perspective, credit unions today only represent 4.5% of all small business loans at depository institutions. And if we take this common sense step that I'm proposing and double small business lending by credit unions, it would still leave 91% of the small business market to banking institutions. So again, this is a smart, no-cost way of increasing lending without drastically changing the composition of the small business lending market. Now, since some of my colleagues I know have been visited by folks who do not want credit unions to lend more to small businesses, I want to make one thing clear. Credit unions have been making small business loans since their inception in the early 1900s. That's 100+ years ago. And it wasn't until 1998 that there were any limits whatsoever on what they could loan. So that means for 90 years, credit unions were free to help small businesses in their own communities without the federal government unnecessarily getting in the way. And that meant uninhibited small business support, growth, and job creation. But right now, the federal law, whether initially well-intentioned or not, is keeping these jobs from Americans who are out searching for work. It's estimated that the average credit union small business loan is approximately $220,000, and that each $92,000 in additional lending on the part of the nation's credit unions will create one additional job. In the next year, I'm going to say, Mr. President, when we adopt this concept, credit union business lending would increase to $10 billion, which conservatively would create 100,000 new jobs. All we have to do is increase the statutory cap on credit union business lending. I want to just state again for the record, these small, simple statutory changes would not cost taxpayers a cent, but they would dramatically increase the amount of private capital available to small businesses to help make payroll, buy inventory, expand, and innovate. And moreover, the proposed statutory changes are safe and fully supported by the National Credit Union Administration, which is the credit union regulator, and they're the product of an agreement reached last year by the Senate Banking Committee and the Treasury Department. As I begin to close, Mr. President, I want to note all the organizations that support increasing credit union small business loans. The Americans for Tax Reform, the National Association of Realtors, the National Small Business Association, the National Association of Manufacturers, the Heartland Institute, the Competitive Enterprise Institute, the League of United Latin American Citizens, the National Cooperative Business Association, the National Farmers Union, the Hardwood Institute, the National Council of Textile Organizations, and many others. Well, Mr. President, I urge my colleagues to do the right thing, and let's finally fix this unnecessarily federal limit on small business loans and support a smart, focused, bipartisan amendment to increase job growth and support for our local small businesses. Mr. President, I believe my amendment is at the desk. I ask unanimous consent that the pending amendment be set aside and that the Udall Amendment number 242 be called up, and I ask for its immediate consideration.
Is there objection?
Yes, I object, Mr. President, and I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, if I might ask through the chair, my colleague, the nature of the objection, given that this would be so important to expanding business opportunities when our economy is in a troubled state.
Senior Senator from Louisiana is recognized.
I'm happy to report or respond through the chair that a member of the Senate has put a hold on parliamentary procedures that would allow us to move forward on any amendments. The senator should be aware, and so we're unable at this time to have his amendment pending. But I am personally happy that he came down to speak on the amendment. There are other people that feel strongly about that issue as well, so I hope the senator understands we're just not able to take up his amendment at this time.
Mr. President,
Senator from Colorado.
I know that the senator from Louisiana has an interest in the possibilities of this legislation. I also see my colleague from Maine, who has graciously joined me in co-sponsoring this important bill and as well understands the way in which we would trigger innovation, lending, and job creation. I want to thank her, and I yield the floor.